The encounter. The rain fell in relentless sheets across Chennai, turning the evening streets into mirrored labyrinths that reflected the city's neon signs in distorted puddles. Prisha Sharma clutched her leather messenger bag closer to her body, cursing herself for staying so late at the newspaper office. The story she was working on, exposing illegal labor practices in textile factories, had consumed her for weeks, and tonight she'd lost track of time combing through documents from a whistleblower. Should have called a taxi, she muttered, squinting through rain-speckled glasses as she navigated around a particularly deep puddle. Her usual route home through Mylapore was flooded, forcing her to detour through unfamiliar side streets. The monsoon had transformed the normally bustling neighborhood into a ghost town, with most sensible people tucked safely indoors. Prisha checked her phone again. Dead. The battery had given up an hour ago, leaving her without maps or the ability to call for help. She tucked a strand of wet hair behind her ear and quickened her pace, guided only by the occasional street lamp that cast islands of yellow light through the downpour. The sound came first. Footsteps behind her, heavy and deliberate. Prisha glanced back to see three men following at a distance, their faces partially obscured by the rain, but their intent clear in the way they moved. One called out something she couldn't quite hear, but the tone made her stomach tighten with fear. "Just keep walking," she told herself, searching for any open shop or restaurant where she might find safety. But at 9 on a Wednesday during monsoon season, the normally vibrant street was shuttered and dark. The footsteps grew closer. "Hey, journalist lady," one of them slurred his words, confirming he'd recognized her from her byline photo in the Chennai Chronicle. "We want to talk about that story you're writing." Prisha's heart hammered against her ribs. Her exposé had clearly attracted unwanted attention from the factory owners. She picked up her pace, almost running now despite the slippery pavement. "The men behind her broke into a jog. I said stop!" The voice was closer now, angry. Prisha darted down a narrow alley hoping to lose them, but found herself facing a high wall, a dead end. She turned, pressing her back against the wet bricks, clutching her bag that contained all her interview notes and evidence. The three men approached slowly now, knowing she was trapped. The leader, a heavy-set man with a scarred eyebrow, stepped forward. "Give us the files and we'll forget this happened." "I don't have any files," Prisha lied, her voice steadier than she felt. The man reached for her bag, but before his hand made contact, a figure emerged from the shadows of the alley. "I believe the lady said no," came a calm, measured voice. The newcomer stood between Prisha and her pursuers, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a simple dark raincoat. His face was partially obscured, but his stance communicated absolute certainty. "This isn't your business," Scarred Eyebrow snarled. "Three men cornering a woman in an alley? I'm making it my business." The stranger's voice remained even, almost conversational. "The police station is 2 blocks away. I suggest you leave before I escort her there to file a report." Something in his demeanor, the absolute lack of fear, made the men hesitate. They exchanged glances, weighing their options. "This isn't over," Scarred Eyebrow muttered, but he backed away, gesturing for his companions to follow. When they disappeared around the corner, Prisha exhaled shakily. "Thank you. But as she turned toward her rescuer, she found herself alone in the alley. The stranger had vanished as silently as he had appeared, leaving only footprints in the puddles that were rapidly filling with rain. Prisha stood there for a moment, rain mixing with the tears of relief on her face, wondering who the man was and why he'd risked himself to help her. Little did she know that this rainy encounter was just the beginning of a story that would change everything. Echoes of kindness. 2 weeks after the rainy night encounter, Prisha's exposé on labor exploitation in Chennai's textile industry made the front page of the Chennai Chronicle. The piece had already prompted a government inquiry, and Prisha found herself being congratulated by colleagues who had once dismissed her tenacity as naivety. But despite the professional triumph, she couldn't shake the memory of the stranger who had appeared like a phantom in the alley, possibly saving her from serious harm. Earth to Prisha. Zara, her photographer colleague, waved a hand in front of her face. You've been staring at that coffee for 10 minutes. What's going on in that brain of yours? Prisha blinked, returning to the bustling newsroom. Sorry, just thinking about my next assignment. Which is? Zara perched on the edge of Prisha's desk, camera dangling around her neck. Shankar wants me to cover community initiatives in underserved areas. You know, positive stories to balance out all the corruption and crime coverage. Prisha scrolled through her research notes. There's this place in Kottapuram that's caught my attention, Dia Foundation. They run literacy programs and provide meals for children from the slums. Sounds heartwarming, Zara said, though her tone suggested she preferred more dramatic assignments. Want company? I'm free this afternoon. Hours later, they arrived at a modest building painted in cheerful yellow, nestled between apartment blocks on a quiet street. Children's laughter spilled from the open windows, along with the aroma of cooking spices. A hand-painted sign welcomed visitors to Dia Foundation, where every child shines. Inside, the space was organized chaos. One room had children seated on colorful mats practicing reading. Another had teenagers working on computers, and the kitchen buzzed with activity as volunteers prepared what appeared to be a communal meal. Welcome to Dia. A young woman with a bright smile approached them. I'm Deepa, the volunteer coordinator. You must be from the newspaper? Yes, I'm Prisha Sharma, and this is Zara Khan. We're doing a feature on community initiatives. Perfect timing. The children are about to present their art projects, and our founder just arrived. He's usually quite busy with outreach, so you're lucky to catch him. As Deepa led them through the building, Prisha asked about the foundation's work. We started 5 years ago with just a weekend reading program, Deepa explained. Now we offer daily meals, educational support, vocational training, and even legal assistance for families facing eviction. Most of our funding comes from private donations. They entered a large room where children were arranging artwork on display boards. At the far end, a man knelt beside a young boy, helping him attach a drawing to the wall. Something about his profile, the set of his shoulders, the careful way he listened to the child, triggered Prisha's memory. When he stood and turned, Prisha froze. It was him, the stranger from the alley. In daylight, without rain obscuring her vision, she could see him clearly. Early 30s, with thoughtful eyes and the kind of face that seemed permanently set in quiet determination. He wore simple clothes, jeans and a button-down shirt rolled at the sleeves, a stark contrast to the dramatic rescuer she'd built up in her mind. That's Vikram Tanacha, Deepa whispered. He founded Dia after leaving his job at a multinational company. Brilliant man, but very private about his work. Prisha watched as Vikram moved among the children, giving each his full attention. There was no hint of the intensity she'd witnessed that night. Here, he was gentle, patient, fully present for each child who tugged at his sleeve or showed him a drawing. When Deepa introduced them, Vikram's eyes registered subtle recognition as they met Prisha's. But he made no mention of their previous encounter. Ms. Sharma, welcome to Dia. I've read your work, particularly your recent expose. Impressive journalism. Thank you, Prisha replied, searching his face for acknowledgement of that night. Your work here is equally impressive. For the next hour, Vikram showed them around the foundation, explaining programs and introducing volunteers. Zara captured photographs while Prisha conducted interviews, all the while waiting for some sign that Vikram remembered her. It never came. As they prepared to leave, Prisha found a moment alone with him in the small office that doubled as a library. You don't remember me, do you? She asked directly. Vikram's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes. Should I? 2 weeks ago. An alley near Mylapore during the monsoon downpour. 3 men. His posture shifted almost imperceptibly. You seem to have me confused with someone else. I don't think so, Prisha persisted. Why won't you acknowledge it? Vikram carefully shelved a book before responding. The work we do here matters because of what gets accomplished, not who gets credit. The same principle applies elsewhere in my life. Before she could press further, a volunteer called for Vikram's help with a plumbing emergency. He excused himself politely but firmly, leaving Prisha with more questions than answers. On the ride back to the office, Zara scrolled through her photographs. Got some great shots. The kids' faces will make perfect feature images. But Prisha was barely listening, her mind racing with connections. She pulled out her notebook and began jotting down observations. Vikram's reluctance to take credit, Deepa's comment about his private nature, the mysterious timing of the Foundation's creation. Something bigger was happening here. A story beneath the story. I think I'm going to volunteer there, Prisha announced suddenly. Zara looked up from her camera, surprised. For the article? No, Prisha said, watching Chennai pass by through the taxi window. For me. What began as journalistic curiosity had transformed into something else entirely. A pull toward the quiet force that was Vikram Taneja, and the mystery of why a man capable of so much good insisted on remaining in the shadows. Shadows of the Past by the time autumn arrived in Chennai, bringing slightly cooler temperatures and clearer skies, Prisha had become a regular weekend volunteer at Dia Foundation. What had started as a thinly veiled attempt to learn more about Vikram had evolved into genuine commitment. She found herself looking forward to Saturday mornings spent helping children with reading or assisting in the community kitchen. Vikram remained an enigma. He was always cordial, but maintained a careful distance, even as other volunteers embraced Prisha as part of their tight-knit community. She noticed that despite founding the organization, he rarely took center stage, preferring to work behind the scenes, handling logistics and meeting with potential donors. He's always been that way, Deepa told her one afternoon as they prepared lunch together. Brilliant at solving problems but allergic to recognition. Prisha's article about Dia had been published to positive reception, bringing in new donations and volunteers. Yet something about Vikram's story remained untold, a shadow that occasionally darkened his expression when he thought no one was watching. On a particularly busy Saturday, Prisha arrived to find the foundation in disarray. A water main had burst overnight, flooding part of the building. Volunteers scrambled to salvage books and equipment while children huddled in the undamaged areas, looking confused and worried. The municipality says they can't send anyone until Monday, Deepa explained, her usual cheerfulness dimmed by stress. Vikram's been trying to find a private plumber, but with the festival happening this weekend, I might know someone, Prisha offered. Her landlord's brother was a plumber who owed her a favor after she helped his daughter with college application essays. Let me make a call. 3 hours later, the immediate crisis had been contained. Prisha's contact had not only fixed the broken pipe, but also brought friends to help with cleanup. As evening approached, most volunteers and children had gone home, leaving a small core group to finish restoring order. Prisha found Vikram alone in the reading room, carefully drying books page by page. The methodical care in his movements struck her. This wasn't the efficient work of someone checking off a task, but the devoted attention of a person who understood the value of what might otherwise be discarded. You saved us today, he said without looking up, somehow sensing her presence. I made a phone call. You're the one drying books at 8 in the evening? A small smile crossed his face. Fair point. He gently closed the book he'd been working on, a dog-eared copy of The Jungle Book, and finally met her eyes. Would you like some tea? I think we've earned a break. The foundation's kitchen was quiet now. Vikram moved with practiced ease, preparing 2 cups of masala chai while Prisha sat at the small table usually crowded with children. The domesticity of the moment struck her. How strange that this place had become so familiar in just a few months. Your article brought us 3 new major donors, Vikram said, placing a steaming cup before her. I never properly thanked you. It was just good reporting. It was more than that. He settled across from her, his own tea untouched. You captured the spirit of what we're trying to do here, not just the programs. The compliment warmed her more than the tea. For a moment, they sat in comfortable silence, the sounds of the city floating in through the open window. Why won't you talk about that night? Prisha finally asked, her voice gentle but direct. The night you helped me in the alley. Vikram's expression shifted, the familiar guardedness returning. But something was different this time. Perhaps fatigue from the long day, had lowered his defenses. Because that night wasn't about me, he said finally. It was about doing what needed to be done. Is that the same reason you left your corporate job to start Dia? Doing what needed to be done? His fingers tensed around his cup. You've been investigating me. I'm a journalist. Asking questions is what I do. And what have your questions revealed? Prisha chose her words carefully. That 8 years ago, Vikram Taneja was a rising star at Meridian Consulting. That he abruptly resigned after a personal tragedy. That public records show he sold his apartment in the affluent part of the city and used the money to establish a foundation. Vikram's face had gone completely still. And did these records mention my brother? The question caught her off guard. Your brother? Something broke in Vikram's carefully maintained composure. He stood, walking to the window to look out at the darkening sky. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of words long unspoken. His name was Aditya. He was 16, brilliant, funny, everything I wasn't at that age. I was the serious one, always studying, planning my career. He was the one who actually lived. A pause, heavy with memory. Our parents died when I was 22 and he was 12. I became his guardian, but I was so focused on building my career that I didn't see what was happening in his life. Prisha remained silent, understanding they had crossed into territory that required patience, not questions. He fell in with the wrong crowd in his neighborhood, boys who seemed exciting, dangerous. By the time I realized how deep he was in, it was too late. Gang violence! Vikram's voice caught. He was in the wrong place. A territorial dispute that had nothing to do with him. I'm so sorry, Prisha whispered. The police called it collateral damage. Bitterness edged his words, as if a human life could be reduced to an unfortunate side effect. Is that why you help people now? Because you couldn't help him? Vikram turned from the window, his expression raw with honesty. I help because I finally understood what matters. It took losing Aditya to realize I'd been measuring success by the wrong metrics entirely. He gestured around the humble kitchen. This won't bring him back, but it might prevent another family from experiencing what I did. The pieces fell into place for Prisha. Why Vikram avoided recognition, why he worked so tirelessly, why he had stepped between her and danger that rainy night. He was fighting shadows, trying to create light in places darkness had touched. Thank you for telling me, she said simply. Vikram nodded, the guard slowly returning to his features. It's getting late. I should lock up. As they walked to the door together, Prisha felt a shift between them. The distance diminished by shared understanding. Before they parted, she gathered her courage. Would you have dinner with me sometime? Not for an article or foundation business, just dinner. Surprise registered on his face, followed by something that might have been hope. I'd like that, he said quietly. Walking home under the canopy of stars, Prisha realized she was venturing into territory far more complex than any story she'd ever pursued, the uncharted landscape of Vikram Taneja's carefully guarded heart. The breaking point. The relationship between Prisha and Vikram developed with the cautious tempo of two people unaccustomed to letting others close. Dinners evolved into long walks through the city, conversations that stretched into the night, and a gradual intertwining of their separate worlds. For the first time since losing Aditya, Vikram found himself sharing not just his past, but his hopes for Dia's future. Prisha, whose ambition had always directed her forward momentum, discovered the unexpected joy of standing still long enough to truly see someone else. But even as they grew closer, the journalist in Prisha couldn't ignore the connections emerging between her investigation into textile factories and the neighborhood where Dia operated. The same powerful families that owned the factories she'd exposed were also behind a development project, threatening to demolish the very buildings where many of Dia's children lived. It's not a coincidence, she told Vikram one evening. In her small apartment, research materials spread across her dining table. Suresh Malhotra sits on the board of both Vanguard Textiles and the development company. The same man who threatened legal action over my factory expose is now pushing to revitalize, their euphemism for demolish, the Kottarpuram settlement. Vikram studied the documents with growing concern. If these families are evicted, they'll be relocated 30 kilometers outside the city. The children would lose access to their schools, to DIA, to the community networks they depend on. Exactly, Prisha said, pacing with restless energy. And the timing of the eviction notices right after my article can't be coincidental. This is retaliation, hitting vulnerable people because they couldn't silence me directly. Guilt and determination warred on her face. Vikram crossed the room to her, gently taking her hands in his. This isn't your fault, but I'm connected to it. I need to write this story, Vikram. Expose the entire network, how these corporations exploit workers, then displace them when they become inconvenient. The worry in Vikram's eyes deepened. The people behind this have already tried to intimidate you once. A bigger expose will make you an even bigger target. I can't be a journalist who backs down from the truth because it's dangerous, Prisha countered. Besides, if I don't write this, who will speak for these families? Their disagreement simmered over the following days as Prisha dug deeper into her investigation. She interviewed families facing eviction, uncovered questionable permits fast-tracked through bribed officials, and connected financial dots between the textile empire and the development company. What emerged was a picture of systematic exploitation more extensive than even she had imagined. Meanwhile, Vikram channeled his concern into action, helping families file legal challenges to the eviction notices and organizing community resistance. They were fighting the same battle from different angles, but the strain between them grew as the danger increased. 3 days before her follow-up article was scheduled to run, Prisha received the first threat. A simple envelope slipped under her apartment door containing photos of her entering and leaving her building, walking to work, meeting sources. The message was clear. We are watching you. When she showed the photos to Vikram that evening, his face drained of color. You need to pull the article. That's exactly what they want, Prisha argued. If I back down now, they win. If something happens to you, they win anyway. For the first time since she'd known him, Vikram raised his voice. The outburst hung between them, revealing the depth of his fear. Prisha stood her ground. I won't let them silence me. The story runs on Sunday. Then at least stay somewhere else until it's published. Your apartment isn't safe. She agreed to this compromise, relocating temporarily to Zara's place while finishing her article. The distance from Vikram, physical and emotional, left a hollow ache in her chest. But she channeled her energy into creating the most thorough, irrefutable piece of journalism she could. The night before publication, she received a call from her editor. Prisha, we have a problem. Legal just reviewed your piece and they're spooked. The board is pressuring us to kill it. What? The evidence is solid, Shankar. We have documentation, multiple sources. I know that, he interrupted, frustration evident in his voice. But Malhotra's people have been making calls. Apparently he plays golf with our publisher's brother-in-law. They're threatening not just lawsuits, but pulling all their advertising across our parent company's publications. The implications sank in. So corporate interests trump the truth? People are losing their homes, Shankar. I'm trying to find a compromise. If we tone down certain allegations, focus more on the human impact rather than the corporate connections, that undermines the entire point. Prisha felt the story slipping through her fingers. The connection is what matters. It's what proves this isn't coincidence but calculated exploitation. After an hour of heated debate, they reached an uneasy compromise. The article would run, but with certain names removed and the corporate connections presented as alleged rather than directly stated. It wasn't the full truth, but it was better than silence. Exhausted, Prisha left Zara's apartment to clear her head, walking through the quiet evening streets without a clear destination. Her feet carried her almost unconsciously toward Dia Foundation. Though closed for the night, the building had become a sanctuary of sorts, a place where purpose and hope resided. She was surprised to see lights still on inside. Through the window, she spotted Vikram sitting alone at a table covered with papers, his face drawn with worry. Before she could decide whether to knock, her phone rang. An unknown number. Ms. Sharma, came a voice she recognized as belonging to Scarred Eyebrow from the alley confrontation months ago. I understand your article runs tomorrow. Her blood turned cold. How did you get this number? The same way we found out about your friend's little charity, he replied smoothly. It would be a shame if something happened to that building full of children's artwork and dreams, wouldn't it? Fire hazards are so common in old buildings. The threat hung in the air like poison. Through the window, Prisha could still see Vikram, unaware of the danger now surrounding the foundation he'd built from grief and hope. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice tight. "Simple. Kill the story, permanently. Or we'll make sure Mr. Taneja's charity becomes a cautionary tale about faulty wiring." The line went dead, leaving Prisha frozen on the sidewalk, watching Vikram through the glass, torn between her commitment to truth and her fear for everything and everyone she had come to love. Light after darkness. Dawn broke over Chennai with the muted colors of uncertainty, the sun struggling through pollution and cloud cover as if mirroring Prisha's internal conflict. She hadn't slept, her mind cycling through impossible choices. By morning, clarity had emerged from the chaos. Not a perfect solution, but the only path that honored both her principles and her heart. Her first call was to Shankar. "I need you to hold the article, Prisha, not kill it," she clarified quickly. "Just delay publication while I secure additional evidence. Something that will make it impossible for even the publisher's golf buddies to suppress." Her second call was to Zara, outlining a plan that made her photographer friend whistle with both admiration and concern. "That's either brilliant or suicidal. Possibly both. Will you help me? Do you even need to ask? I'll bring my best cameras." Her final call was the hardest, to Vikram, asking him to meet her at a small cafe far from both their usual haunts. When he arrived, the shadows under his eyes matched her own, evidence of a sleepless night. "They threatened Dia," she said without preamble, watching his face pale. "The same men who cornered me in the alley months ago. They know about my article, and they're willing to hurt children to keep it from publishing." Vikram's hands tightened around his untouched tea. "I'll increase security, move our programs temporarily. That's not why I asked you here." Prisha took a deep breath. "I need your help with something bigger. Something that will protect not just Dia, but everyone involved in this story." Over the next hour, she outlined her plan, not to retreat, but to expand the battlefield beyond what Malhotra and his associates could possibly control. It was audacious, requiring both courage and connections neither of them had ever fully leveraged. "This is dangerous," Vikram said when she finished explaining. "For both of us." "Yes," she admitted. "But doing nothing is dangerous too, just in ways that unfold more slowly. Children without homes, families without support. Corruption that grows like cancer because no one dares excise it." Vikram studied her face, seeing not just the passionate journalist he'd come to love, but a mirror of his own journey, the moment when fear of loss transformed into determination to protect. "When do we start?" he asked simply. The next 72 hours unfolded in a carefully orchestrated campaign. While the Chennai Chronicle held Prisha's article, she and Vikram activated networks they'd built over years, her journalism contacts and his corporate connections that had remained largely dormant since Aditya's death. Zara documented everything, her camera capturing evidence of meetings between developers and city officials in exclusive clubs where bribes changed hands. Former colleagues of Vikram's from Meridian Consulting provided access to financial records showing the money trail between Vanguard Textiles and shell companies purchasing land in Kottapuram. Most crucially, 3 prominent national news outlets and an international human rights organization agreed to simultaneously publish the complete investigation along with all supporting evidence. If one outlet could be pressured into silence, 5 could not, especially when one operated beyond Indian borders. The night before the coordinated publication, Prisha and Vikram gathered with Dia's children and their families in the foundation building, not to hide, but to stand together. "Tomorrow, some powerful people will be very angry with us," Vikram explained to the assembled community. "They may try to frighten us or threaten this place we've built together." A father raised his hand. "Then why are you doing this?" "We have so little already. We cannot afford to lose Dia too." Prisha stepped forward. "Because the truth is you've already lost if we do nothing." "The eviction orders are just the beginning," This is about whether people like us have the right to exist in this city at all. What Ms. Sharma means, Vikram added gently, is that sometimes fighting is the only form of protection that matters. But we're not fighting alone. As if on cue, vehicles began arriving outside. Journalists, lawyers, social activists, even some of Vikram's former business associates who had been moved by the cause. The community that had gathered to seek protection was now surrounded by a larger community of support. Among the arrivals was Deepa, leading a group of volunteers carrying supplies. "We heard there might be trouble," she explained with her characteristic smile. "So we brought reinforcements." The night passed in a strange mixture of tension and celebration. The foundation transformed into a fortress of solidarity. Children taught supporters their favorite games. Mothers prepared food for the growing crowd. Fathers and elders stood watch at entryways. What had begun as Prisha's solitary quest for truth and Vikram's private mission of redemption had evolved into something neither could have imagined, a community, finding its collective voice. When morning came, the coordinated articles appeared across platforms, impossible to silence with a single threat or bribe. Prisha's byline ran alongside journalists from Delhi, Mumbai, and London, the evidence presented so comprehensively that denial became futile. By midday, the stock price of Vanguard Textiles had plummeted. By evening, the development project had been temporarily suspended pending review. By the following morning, a judge had issued an emergency stay on all eviction notices in Kotturapuram. It wasn't a complete victory. Corporate power rarely surrenders entirely. But it was a beginning. More importantly, it was proof that vulnerability, when transformed into collective action, could become its own kind of strength. 1 week later, as the media storm began to subside, Prisha and Vikram sat together on the roof of the foundation building, watching the sunset paint Chennai's skyline in gold and crimson. "I've been thinking about something you said when we first met," Prisha said, her head resting against his shoulder, "about how the work matters because of what gets accomplished, not who gets credit." "I remember," Vikram replied softly. "I think I finally understand what you meant. It's not about being invisible. It's about being part of something larger than yourself." She gestured toward the community garden below, where children played while parents tended vegetables. "This is larger than either of us." Vikram took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers, in a gesture that had become familiar, yet never lost its significance. "When Aditya died, I thought the lesson was that I needed to save others to make up for failing him. But that wasn't it at all. What was the lesson, then? That we're not meant to save people. We're meant to stand beside them while they save themselves." He looked at her with eyes that had gradually shed their shadows. "You taught me that." As darkness fell over the city, lights began to appear, thousands of windows illuminated against the night, each one representing lives being lived, stories unfolding behind glass and brick. Somewhere in that urban constellation were the men who had threatened them, the corporate interests that had tried to silence them, the powers that had nearly prevailed. But here on this rooftop, surrounded by the community they had helped bring together, a different kind of power had emerged, one built not on intimidation but on connection, not on control but on courage. Prisha leaned forward, her lips meeting Vikram's in a kiss that held all the promise of their shared journey, from strangers in a rainy alley to partners in a purpose larger than themselves. When they finally parted, the city continued to sparkle around them, a reminder that light persists even in the darkest times, not because darkness is defeated, but because ordinary people refuse to stop kindling flames. "What happens now?" Vikram asked, his voice gentle in the gathering night. Prisha smiled, her face illuminated by both starlight and certainty. "Now, we keep writing the story.